Hello, thank you for taking the time to start this journey. This is the first part of a two-part series called Youth Work Leaders Working Towards the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. If you click the audio icon embedded in the bottom left-hand corner of each slide, you'll be able to hear the narrator. Before I start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. My name's Karen Brooke, and as an independent consultant I work with DARPL to design, deliver and co-deliver anti-racist professional development. And my specialist areas are decolonisation in relation to the curriculum and Black British history, which I simply refer to as British history. I've been working in this particular area for 8 years, and my other area of work is with black men in prison, delivering a black self-development programme to aid their rehabilitation. I provide individual support to educational institutions in the form of staff training, and I research curriculum content with the aim of cultural diversification and decolonisation. The 4 aims of this professional learning session are: why anti-racism work is important within a youth work setting. Number 2, to have a better understanding of racism and race-related terminology. Number 3, to be able to define racism and recognise it in all its guises within the context of youth work. And 4, to critically reflect on your own understanding of anti-racism and identify the next steps to take.
The report tells us that very sadly, too many children and young people are still experiencing racism and racist incidents in school on a very regular and almost normal basis. It also tells us very sadly that most children and young people don't feel that it's worth reporting these incidents because they don't think that anything will happen or that the school will take it seriously. We also heard from teachers and many other stakeholders who also said that teachers too would welcome and would value more support and more guidance to enable them to respond to racist incidents more effectively. So the report has some really key recommendations for different stakeholders, including for Welsh Government, for local authorities, for schools, but also for bodies such as Estyn and WJC, for example. And we really hope that those different bodies will read and take seriously the recommendations made in the report. This change is well overdue. We have had many different reports and research put together over the years which says very much the same thing. Racism is happening in schools and it's not being dealt with effectively. So as part of Welsh Government's drive to create an anti-racist Wales, we really hope that this report contributes to making schools a safer place where children and young people can feel confident that their experiences will be taken seriously and will be acted upon. So thank you once again for taking part and for your contributions, and I sincerely hope that this will bring about the change that we all want to see. So diolch yn fawr.
So why is anti-racism work important within a youth work setting? Within the Youth Work in Wales Principles and Purposes document, it states that fundamental to youth work are the principles of equality and inclusion, and supporting young people to be able to understand and exercise their rights, challenge oppression and equality is amongst the purposes of youth work in Wales. It recognises that Wales is a country with a diversity of language and cultures, and it promotes encouraging young people to protect their own rights and those of others. In addition, one of the 5 pillars is focused solely on inclusivity, enabling young people to develop knowledge, understanding and positive attitudes and behaviour in relation to racial, social and cultural identity, disability and diversity of heritage, value one's own and other people's languages, citizenship and respect for other people's choices. The Children's Commissioner for Wales staff project team, supported by Chantal Horton, founder and director of DARPL, along with Professor Charlotte Williams of Bangor University, after carrying out research with children, young people, teachers and other professionals, they produced a report in 2023 featured on the above slide called Take It Seriously: Children's Experiences of Racism Within Secondary Schools. This particular cohort of young people actively engage with youth services across the country, as you know. At the same time, the Gwent Safeguarding Board commissioned DARPL to undertake a research project which included both primary and secondary age learners, staff and families, and it's to explore experiences of racism in school and community life, and looked into the frequency of reporting or not reporting. A regional action plan has been implemented on the recommendations from this report, drawing on the voices of the learners. Now I'd like you to watch the video embedded within this slide. To hear Rocio Sin Fuentes, I apologise if I've mispronounced her name slightly, talking about some of the report's findings. While you're listening to the video, jot down any immediate actions and ideas that come to mind that your provision needs to develop and take forward. Also, ask yourself, how effectively do your practitioners respond when a young person confides that they are being racially bullied at school or within your provision? Are you familiar with the content of the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan? This report contains 14 recommendations, including major changes in how the Welsh Government and others should develop youth work services to ensure a strong and resilient sector, to which all young people in Wales can access or be offered. Work is underway under the advice of the Youth Work Strategy Implementation Board to develop and take forward these recommendations, one of which recommends that the Welsh Government and the youth work sector should work together to promote equality, inclusion and diversity, both in terms of access to youth work services in Wales and in relation to the role that the youth work services can play in proactively challenging discriminatory attitudes and behaviour within society. I'd urge you to read the full document, which you can access by the link on the screen. Let's start to explore the concept of race by looking back in history. Up until around the 1500s, Europeans traded with countries on other continents relatively peacefully. European colonisation, a political economic phenomenon whereby various European nations explored, conquered, settled and exploited large areas of the world, started to take place. The age of modern colonialism began around 1500s, and that's the Tudor period in Britain. Following the European discoveries of a sea route around Africa's southern coast in 1488 and America in 1492. Britain was one of the major players at colonising other countries during the 1600s, with the beginnings of the British Empire during the reign of Elizabeth I. When Britain colonised large chunks of Africa and North America, they not only extracted and claimed all of the valuable resources, including the people, but they also imposed and enforced their language, culture, systems, spiritual beliefs on the people, and removed evidence of their histories by taking historical artefacts to display in museums in the UK and sell to other European countries. Race is a social construct that became formalised during the period of colonisation in the 1600s. It was a way to justify the behaviours of the Europeans towards other people whilst exploiting their resources committing acts of genocide and land thefts. Europeans saw themselves as better human beings, and the educated people they came across through their self-inflated worth, fueled by guilt. They convinced themselves that they were teaching people they subjugated through the use of weapons to become more civilized. Their racist beliefs, attitudes and behaviours were backed up in 1833 with the introduction of the pseudoscience eugenics by Francis Galton. Galton was an English statistician, demographer and ethnologist, and also the cousin of Charles Darwin. Galton defined eugenics as the study of agencies under social control that may improve or impair the racial qualities of future generations, either physically or mentally. Galton claimed that health and disease, as well as social and intellectual characteristics, were based upon hereditary and the concept of race. During the 1870s and 1880s, discussions of human improvement and the ideology of scientific racism became increasingly common. So-called experts determined individuals and groups of people to be either superior or inferior. They believed biological and behavioural characteristics were fixed and unchangeable, and placed individuals, populations and nations inside of that hierarchy. Eugenics is linked to present-day forms of discrimination, racism, ableism and neocolonialism, and it's practiced in policies and beliefs around the world, especially in laws and public service practice.
Racism. Race is a powerful idea. Race is based on how a person looks and their culture. Race is a way to feel a sense of belonging with family and friends. Racism is the made-up belief that some groups of people are superior and some are inferior because of their race. Racism is everywhere in our past, our present, and routinely favors whites. Racism is the reason that some groups get better health care, jobs, and education. Racism is a real and damaging force in the world, especially for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. Race is a part of our identity, but not the sum total of who we are. Our shared humanity depends on justice and understanding.
The definition of racism is often incorrectly interchanged with the definitions of discrimination and prejudice. I'd like you to watch this short film, which provides a clear definition of what race is and how racism affects everybody. Before going on to the next slide, I'd like you to reflect on what was said in the video, and I'd like you to write down a few ways in which racism actually affects you. While the primary harm of racism impacts non-white individuals directly, understanding these broader implications helps explain why dismantling racism and working towards equality can benefit everyone. Here are 3 examples of how racism may affect you. Social and moral costs. Racism perpetuates divisive and unjust systems, which can cause moral and ethical strain on individuals who recognise these injustices. Witnessing or perpetrating unfairness and inequality can lead to guilt, shame or discomfort, especially for those who actively confront the legacy of racial injustice. Have you had a conversation with a friend, work colleague or family member and they've made a racist comment which has caused you discomfort and you didn't offer a counter argument because you lacked confidence or you didn't want to rock the boat? Another example is political manipulation. Racism is often used as a tool to maintain political and social power. By dividing groups along racial lines, certain power structures structures can gain support while ignoring systemic issues that affect everyone, like healthcare or fair wages. This can lead white individuals to vote or act against their broader economic and social interests. We witnessed this in the summer of 2024, when far-right anti-immigration protests and violent riots occurred across the United Kingdom for 6 days. The riots were fueled by false claims circulated by far-right groups on social media. And in addition, earlier in the year, a few politicians had voiced somewhat Islamophobic, racist and anti-immigration sentiments. Finally, the psychological impact. Racism may shape white people's identities in ways that reinforce narrow worldviews and foster implicit biases. Research has shown that holding prejudiced views can create stress, limit empathy, and even foster fear of other groups. This was also exemplified during the rioting of the summer in 2024.
We've been engaged in a global conversation about race and racism. You've probably had discussions at home, at school, or at work, and in those conversations you've probably heard the term white privilege. You may have even had this term used in a way that felt like an insult or an accusation. Others will have told you that it's all just made up to make white people feel bad, and none of this is right. Privilege is a hard concept for people to understand because normally when we talk of privilege, we imagine immediate unearned riches and tangible benefits for anyone who has it. But white privilege, and indeed all privilege, is actually more about the absence of inconvenience, the absence of an impediment or challenge, and as such, when you have it, you really don't notice it. But when it's absent, it affects everything you do. There are lots of types of privilege out there. The privilege of being born into a wealthy family versus a poor family is kind of obvious, but then there's the privilege of being able-bodied versus having or acquiring a disability that most of us take for granted. I have two very close friends who are wheelchair users, and I'll be honest, when I first met them, I was completely ignorant about the everyday ways their lives are made harder through no fault of their own. Some of these ways are simply thoughtless, but some of them are just the way we live, just the way we build infrastructure, just the way everything works. That just makes their life harder than mine. That's just one of the ways that I'm privileged. And understanding that, embracing that, doesn't make me a bad person. But ignoring it raises the chance that my friends will be excluded in ways that are not obvious to me. And as their friend, I can't allow that. There's a good chance, as a white person watching this, your life is already hard. Every day you have to overcome some difficulty or challenge just to get by, but you can still have white privilege. White privilege doesn't mean you haven't worked hard or you don't deserve the success you've had. It doesn't mean that your life isn't hard or that you've never suffered. It simply means that your skin color has not been the cause of your hardship or suffering. There is nothing but a benefit to understanding our own privileges, white and otherwise. It brings us closer to those who are different. It helps us be vigilant about the ways we treat others different than us. It helps us make a society that is fairer and more equal. Having white privilege doesn't make your life easy, but understanding it can help you realize why some people's lives are harder than they should be.
The term white privilege means living with the absence of racism. It's nothing to do with wealth, lack of personal or social problems, but in addition to life struggles, your race negatively impacts your life. Take some time and watch the video above, which provides a more detailed explanation of the term white privilege. Ibram X. Kendi in his book How to Be an Anti-Racist, summarises the difference between not being a racist and anti-racist as follows. He says the opposite of racist isn't not racist, it's anti-racist. So what's the difference? One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. One either allows racial iniquities to persevere as a racist, or confronts racial iniquities as an anti-racist. The difference is key. Racist beliefs and actions are those that promote the idea that one race is superior to others, and that racial disparities are caused by the supposed deficiencies of certain racial groups. Anti-racist beliefs and actions actively challenge and seek to dismantle racist policies, structures and attitudes. An anti-racist confronts racial inequities and seeks to change them. Kendi emphasises that being not racist is not enough. One must be actively engaged in anti-racist work to create meaningful change.
Racism makes us confused. Sometimes I actually don't use the word. I don't use the word racism because it's so often misunderstood. Being young and growing up in Britain, overt racism was casual. But you kind of got used to the fact that in any kind of public arena, you could be racially abused.
You said he was born in Manchester, so well, he ain't a proper blackie then, is he?
I haven't heard that terminology for a long time. Blackie. Yeah, it reminds me of school.
I mean, the ones I'm talking about, they're your proper blacks, ain't they? The ones that was born in the jungle, your natives. I mean, don't tell me they're educated, half of them are still eating each other.
So sometimes to understand racism, we need personal experiences. About 3 years ago, I was walking through White Hart Lane station. I heard someone shout very loudly, the N-word. It's a word that I don't use. I thought at first it was someone listening to an Eminem song or something, and they were, thinking that they were Jay-Z. So I just kept walking. The word was shouted again, and who do you think you are? Well, I know who I am. But so I looked round to see what was going on in case it wasn't directed towards me. I didn't think instinctively that it was. And it was directed towards me. There was a woman in a flat, looking out of the flat, and she was screaming and yelling at me. I said, why are you shouting at me and why are you shouting the N-word? Because that's what you people call yourself. I said, you people? This was a woman who doesn't know me and has never seen me before, and yet she felt empowered, not 20 years ago, not 30 years ago, to use such terminology to refer to me. And that's to show you that those overt forms of racism still exist. I work with a lot of white middle class people who like to feel that they're not racist, sexist, homophobic and all these other things, but they are. They are instinctively, and they do it not knowing that they're doing it. And when I'm there, they self-censor themselves on issues of ethnicity or issues that they feel that I would be sensitive about. Does that mean that they've changed? It means at least that they're thinking about them in a certain kind of way because I'm in their social space. If I wasn't in their social space, perhaps they wouldn't be thinking about it. That's the problem with racism. Yeah, even in human interactions, one is second-guessing oneself as to, did that happen because of colour? Did that happen because of ethnicity? I like to go to the cinema and watch films. I don't think while I'm enjoying that film, all those millions of people throughout the world that can't see. I have privilege. I have the privilege of sight. That privilege of sight means that I don't think about those people that don't have the same privilege. Does that make me prejudiced? I think in a way it does. It makes me prejudiced against those that cannot see. But it's a kind of privilege and prejudice that seems natural to me because the world is effectively made for those that can see. That's the thing about prejudice. It feels normal. I think the only way that you eradicate racism is by changing people's beliefs and ideas. And the only way you get to do that is through education and information. You can punish people for their ideas or their beliefs, but you might not change their views and ideas. I think you need to change people's views and ideas, not punish them.
I'd like you to watch the following short video by historian and assistant professor Onyeka Nubia. Onyeka is well known for his thought-provoking perceptions in relation to race and history. In this short clip, he discusses why people are racist and what's behind prejudice. When you are watching the video, think about what he's saying in the context of your community, your professional practice, and your worldview. Reflecting on unconscious racism and white privilege is a deeply personal and ongoing process. The purpose of this professional learning is not to make you feel guilty, but to encourage growth, responsibility, and empathy. It's important to keep this conversation alive in your life and use it to build more inclusive and equitable spaces for the young people accessing youth provision in Wales. In the last video, Dr. Onyeka Nubia gave an example of overt racism that was directed at him and how he responded. He then went on to talk about prejudice, giving the example of living in a world created for the sighted and not consciously considering the millions of people who are sight restricted. I'd like you to take some time and read through the questions above and write down your responses, paying particular attention to question number 4. I'd like to give you a quick overview of this diagram because it's a useful tool. This graphic is broken down into 3 phases to represent a person on a journey towards becoming anti-racist. Dr. Ibrahim breaks this continuum into 3 main groups: the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. In the fear zone, you can see that there is a denial that racism is a problem, or not interested or willing to take action to combat it. This is a very comfortable space for people with race privilege to exist. Race privilege, or white privilege, as we previously explored, enables a person to exist in the fear zone because their life is not negatively impacted by the colour of their skin. Once you've moved out of the fear zone, then you'll start to do some of the things in the learning zone. For example, asking questions, reading books, evaluating your own privilege, listening to people who look different than you. Some of the things in this learning zone you may find shocking, upsetting, and uncomfortable because you'll learn that things you hoped weren't true, in fact, are true. When you start to learn about and get shocked by the experiences of others, then hopefully you'll become more motivated to push yourself into the growth zone and you'll start to speak out. In this zone, you'll start to promote and advocate for policies within a youth work setting that are anti-racist, and you'll start to recognise and support racially marginalised groups and individuals within your local community. The important thing to know is that in order to transition from the fear zone to the growth zone, you'll have to do some work. You'll have to prepare for mental shifts and allow yourself to be uncomfortable, or growth pains as I like to call them. Also equally important to note is that reaching the growth zone is not the end. Staying there requires constant work. The items listed in the growth zone are activities and not a mindset. So it's not a matter of thinking these activities are good ideas. It's a matter of putting these ideas into your professional practice. Finally, on this slide, I'd like you to click on the link entitled Letter to a White Man. This letter is written from the perspective of a European American male, charting his journey of growth and reflection about his own understanding of racism post George Floyd's murder in 2020. I'm aware that the context of this letter is now become a little dated, as currently there has been the start of a shift in relation to people's awareness of the existence and negative impact of racism on everyone's lives. And it's not representative of every single white male, but it is a really useful tool to help you understand someone else's growth. The letter should help support your own growth and understanding, and I'm sure you'll find it very useful. After reading the letter, have a look at the reflective questions on the right-hand side of the slide and note down your responses. Keep them in a safe place to reflect upon later. In this diagram, visualise racism as a travelator, and it is taking the person towards racial inequity and injustice. The first diagram represents the conscious desire of some people to achieve this endpoint, and they use energy moving in the same direction as the travelator. They are actively racist. The middle diagram represents most people's position. They are non-racist, meaning they do not consciously desire racial injustice and do not strive to move towards it. However, because our system operates in ways that maintains racial inequality, non-racist people are still being carried along the same path as actively racist people, which will continue to lead to inequity and injustice. Anti-racist people see where the walkway is headed and actively work against the system that leads to injustice. Being anti-racist is not passive, but instead requires constant effort. Progress can seem slow or even non-existent at times. The journey of anti-racism is a constant journey, and to implement it within an organisation takes time and energy to ensure that it's embedded within the organisation's ethos to ensure longevity. It's worth revisiting Neil Thompson's model for addressing social disadvantage, including discrimination and poverty, known as the Personal Cultural Structural Analysis, that's PCS. Racism is laden with issues of power, and it can appeal to some people who are unconsciously or consciously driven to wield power over others. This plays into the racism paradigm too. Being anti-racist will necessarily incur some challenges of this power, and in some cases to remove some of their power. Thompson's PCS model is also a useful tool to view racism in terms of oppression being personal, cultural and structural, to help you think about the layers at which racism manifests and the layers it needs to be challenged on too. When relating anti-racist practice to youth work, it's useful to visit Thompson's PCS model in terms of analysing how oppression and a disadvantage affects individuals, groups and society. Keith Bishop is a JNC qualified youth worker and university lecturer with substantial experience, having worked with children and their families since 1991. If you click on the YouTube link on the slide, you'll hear him talking about the importance of recognising that discrimination and oppression operates at these three different levels, and how we then need to make sure that our responses are appropriate. Click on the link, watch the short video to help you reflect on the scenarios presented on the following slide. Complete the exercise before listening to this narrative. Now, let's examine the questions together in more detail. Number 1. I have amended all our policies to include clear guidance, including action to take if a racist incident occurs. The policies and guidance need to be introduced along with professional learning for the staff team and monitored initially on a bi-monthly basis and then 6-monthly, along with data capturing the nature and number of incidents that may have occurred. A nil return in a multi-ethnic area is often not a good sign, as it can hide the fact that racist incidents are not being reported for various reasons. For example, a fear of not being believed or being blamed for causing trouble. Or a racist incident occurred and was discussed with the practitioner, who then decided it wasn't a racist incident and took it no further. The reporting of racist incidents should follow the same guidelines and with equal gravitas as to those within your safeguarding policies and procedures. On the DARPL website, there's a guidance document called Eradicate Racism in Learning Organisations, which can easily be adapted for a youth work setting. In relation to Thompson's theory, this is an example of a structural issue as it relates to the organisation's policies. Question number 2. I have compiled a list of negative race-related words that the staff and young people cannot use, and I frequently draw their attention to it on the notice board. This is very problematic. Drawing up a list of offensive words and displaying it prominently can cause racial trauma and introduce negative and offensive language. It's better to deal with any offensive language when it occurs directly and on a one-to-one basis with the person or people involved. In relation to Thompson's theory, this is an example of a structural issue, as there should be clear policies, procedures and guidelines on how to tackle the issue of inappropriate language used by service users. Question number 3. I treat everybody equally. I don't see colour. Statistics prove that everybody is not treated equally in relation to their race. This stance could be seen as someone who doesn't want to acknowledge or engage with racial difference, or they deny that racism is a problem and they are choosing to ignore an individual's identity and culture. In relation to Thompson's theory, this would be categorised as a personal issue because an individual has said it in relation to how they think and feel. And the last question. If I overheard a colleague being explicitly racist during a private telephone conversation in the workplace, I'd draw their attention to it and consider reporting it to my manager. At first, this could be viewed as a little tricky because it was a private telephone conversation, but due to the fact that the conversation took place in the workplace during working hours and the comments made meet the definition of explicit racism. Explicit racism refers to conscious acts of discrimination, such as using racial slurs, engaging in hate speech, openly advocating the superiority or inferiority of certain racial or ethnic groups. You must report it to your manager. If, on the other hand, you overheard implicit racism, for example, the colleague displayed religious or racially stereotypical attitudes and prejudices, etc., you should have a conversation with your colleague first, questioning what they said without any exaggeration and saying clearly and calmly why you think what they said was an example of unconscious racism. In relation to Thompson's theory, I would categorise the correct response to this as structural because the organisation should have policies in place to respond to both situations. We've come to the end of part 1, supporting youth work leaders working towards the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. And for many of you, this is the start of your anti-racism journey. Understanding racism and instigating change within yourself and into your professional practice can sometimes feel difficult and an uphill struggle in certain situations. But the benefits to your service users and the local community grossly outweigh any minor personal discomfort and will become a rewarding journey the further you go. In the part 2 of this series, the focus is on anti-racism and youth work practice. Feel free to revisit part 1, as I am aware that it contains a lot of information. Further support can be found on the DARPL website. And don't hesitate to contact a DARPL team member for further guidance and support. Thank you.